Welcome to this workshop on Compost is the Gardener's Best Friend, presented by the Nevada County Master Gardeners. Here are our workshop presenters, Mary Sanicus, Kristen Otto, and Peggy Sliker.
Welcome to our first Compost Zoom workshop. My name is Mary Sanicus, and to introduce myself, I came to composting through horses. I was involved in horses, got involved in natural horse keeping, which led me to a lot of manure. And in 2005, I took the Alameda County Master Composting course, which was life-changing, amazing. And I ended up designing a large-scale manure system for the boarding facility where I was. And then I just took up and left with 2 horses, Muscovy ducks and a bunch of red wigglers. And now I have my own composting here in Grass Valley for 2 horses. And because this workshop has been abbreviated from 2 hours plus a tour of a live compost pile down to 1 hour on Zoom, we have made a YouTube of a tour of my own compost pile. And you'll be able to view that on YouTube separately. In addition, you'll be able to view the complete slideshow with all the speaker notes that is not condensed. But we're going to do our best in 1 hour, and that's my introduction. So here's Kristen now.
Hi, I'm Kristen Otto, and I've been living in Nevada County for about 20 years now, gardening and making my own compost. And the homemade compost is really the best. And if you have a big garden, you have a lot of garden waste. And if you have any animals, and I have 3 donkeys, they make a lot of poop. And Mary has her stuffed horse. I have my stuffed donkey. And so there's a good way to get rid of that. And we'll talk more about where you can get your own manure if you need it. So I'll be back.
Hi, I'm Peggy Sliker. I began gardening when I was a kid because my grandfather retired and decided he needed a roadside vegetable stand. So I and all of the grandchildren were pressed into farm work. When we moved up here, I managed to grow tomatoes in the deep forest. So those are my vegetable experiences. I've had a compost pile ever since I've had my own backyard. So for 40 years, I've been composting, but I have no animals. So I do the lazy, slow composting with nothing but vegetable matter. So we span the spectrum here of composting experiences, and we will tell you more about it starting right now. Thank you.
Okay, so compost. Compost is defined as anything that was alive or once alive can be composted. Anything that can be decomposed. So this excludes rocks, minerals, glass, ceramics, metals, man-made plastics, that sort of thing. You can compost clothing, but there's often a lot of polyester in the thread and so on. So composting is for what we're calling organic materials only. And there are 2 kinds of composting. Aerobic, which is the home composting we're talking about. Whoops. And anaerobic, which emits methane. Well, anaerobic comes into play when there's no air involved in composting. It's a wet, stinky mess. And this is what happens in the landfill when people throw anything organic into the landfill. it becomes anaerobic, and anaerobic decomposition emits methane, which is a greenhouse warming, a very potent form of it, very persistent and potent. Humans are causing more than half of the total methane emitted. So here you can see on that the landfill is contributing 16% of the total methane emissions. Improper manure management, that would be the dairy and the cattle people industry, meat industry, is contributing 9%. But we can have an impact on this 16%. By the way, this 20% belching by cattle is not just cow, it's the industry that is doing that. Okay, so these 16% in the landfill that we could be diverting to composting, that consists of yard trimmings, 2% is food, wood, and so on. So we can have a big impact on all of this. These others, glass and paper and so on, can be recycled. But by composting, we can reduce this methane. The program Green Waste is excellent, but it is wasteful because you've got a lot of trucking around, the huge heavy equipment that turns the compost. It's energy intensive, and it is a poor quality end product because the inputs are not controlled. There could be toxins and so on. It's to be avoided if you can do it at home. And homemade is always best. You know what's in it. It's a high quality, because we're going to talk all about that. And our goal is to inspire you, even if you're a pro, to be more creative and be more inspired. And there's tremendous environmental benefits. So the tools for composting.
The good news about composting is that it's a really low-tech activity. You probably have the tools you need already in your garage or in your shed. You need a pitchfork, you need a shovel, you need a wheelbarrow. You can go low-end wheelbarrow, which you probably already have around, or you can really indulge yourself and get an expensive wheelbarrow that'll move just with your fingertip pushing it. So you can also indulge yourself with buying a thermometer. You can get a thermometer that's specifically for composting, or you can use the thermometer you use in your kitchen, or maybe buy yourself a second one, and just tie it with a piece of thread, stick it in your compost pile. We've done this and compared the two thermometers side by side in the demo garden, and they give you the same temperature. So that works. And if you really want to go low tech on that, you can just use a piece of rebar and stick it right down into your compost pile in the center. And when you pull it out, you can feel how warm it is. So your tools are really easy. And the recipe is also easy. Whether you're going to make a small add-on pile of compost in your backyard that's going to go very slowly. You need the next slide. Or if you're going to make a large batch compost pile, which we'll tell you about, the same recipe works for both of them. You need equal volumes of brown and green, and you need water and air. It's easy. There's no difference whether you're going to do a cold, small pile like I do, or whether you're going to do a batch pile that gets really hot and goes faster. So your cold pile, which I do, involves taking my kitchen scraps out to the compost pile, adding shredded paper, adding other sources of browns, and just letting it sit there and do its thing. I sift it about once a year. If you've got, especially if you have animal manure, you can make a hot batch, you can collect everything, and you still have the same recipe. Equal volumes of brown and green, water, air. It goes faster, you'll get more compost, but you have to work harder right at the beginning. So whatever you want to do will work. You will get compost no matter how you go at it. So go at it.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about the recipe. As Peggy said, browns, equal amounts, equal volume. So volume, browns, greens, carbon, nitrogen. You don't do it by weight. So you would have a bucket of oak leaves and you would have a bucket of coffee grounds. So remember that it's equal amounts by volume. So I wanted to say a couple of things about where you place your compost pile. You want to build it, you can build it in the open, you can put it in a bin, you can make a bin out of pallets or whatever. You can use straw bales and make a bin, and it works really nice because it insulates it. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the heat factor and a little bit later. You want to have it easy access to vehicles, and you want to have it near a water source because you have to have that water is a really important element in the recipe. So on this chart, which you can get on the website so you can see it a little bit easier, you'll see that on that side, I'm not sure how to, it's on my left, the browner browns are the carbons, which are the colder elements. And so the further to the edge they are, the longer they're going to take to break down, the higher in carbon they are, and the more towards the center they are, you know, have a little bit more balance. And the perfect balance is the fresh horse manure or donkey manure. And then as we go on to the right side of the screen, we have the greens, and over here are the hotter greens. So, you know, like fresh poultry manure, pondweed, all of those things, coffee grounds. Coffee grounds are brown, but they're actually a nitrogen. They're actually considered a green. Alfalfa or grass hay. You can actually build a compost pile using a bale of straw and a bale of hay, and layering it, wetting it in between as you layer it, and then you can actually just build it with that. But it's better, the more diversity that you have in your compost pile, the more diverse ingredients, the higher quality compost you're going to get. So the nice thing about browns is that you can stockpile them. So if you want to make a batch pile, Peggy talked about a hot pile and a cold pile. A cold pile is where you just kind of add what you have when you have it, and it just kind of perks along slowly. A batch pile is going to heat up and get hot, and we're going to talk about that more. But to make a batch pile, you have to have all those ingredients on hand to make it all at once. So the browns are cool because you can stockpile them in garbage cans and bags or piles or whatever, and they will stay the same. The greens will actually slowly become browns if they sit around. Like if you get all your old weeds, you know, you weed out your garden and you let them sit in a pile for a long time, they will go from green to brown. They'll go from nitrogen to carbon. So when you build a batch pile, plan it so that you can do it in one swell swoop, and have it be have it be a time when you're going to have lots of greens. Like I always build big piles in the spring when we're weeding out a lot of stuff.
So what if I have a bunch of big branches?
So the other really important element, Mary asked if she has a bunch of big branches, you want to cut things up small. So the smaller pieces that you can make it, the more surface all the bacteria and fungal elements have to attack and break down. So you want to cut things up. As you're building your pile, as you're layering a 3-inch layer of browns and a 3-inch layer of greens and a 3-inch layer of browns and a 3-inch layer of greens, you want to sprinkle it with water in between each time. So you want your compost pile, your finished compost pile, to be moist like a wrung out sponge. And that's true whether you're doing a hot pile or a cold pile. So if you're doing a cold pile and you add a little bit of stuff, water it in. You always want to cover it. So cover it so in summer or winter, and in the summer you want to cover it to keep it from drying out, to hold that moisture in, and in the winter you want to keep it covered so that it doesn't get leached out from the rains. And the cover doesn't help with the heat. The heat is an internal thing, so covering it, you know, or putting it in the sun or putting it in the shade, none of that matters about it heating up. So you can get ingredients from your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers. Here's a cool resource. This is the Nevada County Manure Exchange. And Peggy calls it the match.com for manure. So you can call them, and we'll put this information on the website so you can find this information. Where you can call and they'll match up local people where, you know, close to where you are, whether they have a tractor to load it for you. So it's a great resource for getting manure. So here, your greens can be, you know, from your animals, from your garden. Next slide. So you can grow your own greens. So we're going to be talking about cover crops when we do our soil workshop on October 31st. We'll be talking more about cover crop, and we'll be talking about it a little bit in our cool season vegetable workshop, which is the next 2 Saturdays. So if you're going to use weeds, get them before they go to seed. If they've gone to seed, then you probably want to make a dedicated pile of seedy stuff that you're not going to use in your vegetable garden, but you can still compost it and, you know, just get rid of those seeds. So this next part, Peggy's going to talk about what makes that heat. So again, remember, compost happens however you make it, but as long as you do that recipe of equal parts browns and greens, water and air, it's going to happen. Here's Peggy.
Compost is one of those areas in life where size matters. We're talking about heat, which you are going to get in your large pile. When you have a small pile, it doesn't heat up very much, and the actual size of your small pile is sort of irrelevant. But if you want to have a hot batch pile, you really need to have enough material. The minimum of a pile that will give you hot composting is 3 foot by 3 foot by 3 foot. Most of the reason for this is that the outside edge of the pile is insulating the center of the pile where the different bacteria are working, generating heat. So you need to have enough heat right in the middle to get those bacteria going. You can insulate your pile just by the size of the pile. If you go up to 4 by 4 by 4, 5 by 5, all these things are better because the outside edge of the pile is going to insulate the pile. You insulate your pile with straw bales around the outside. Most commercially available compost containers are too small. They don't give you enough space to get the insulation of the outside edges and a large enough area in the center that's hot. But it doesn't matter, because if you want to do a batch pile, you don't need to have a commercial container. You can use your own. The straw bales, you can put up a fence and just contain it that way. You can pick up wood pallets. They're often given away for free. You can build yourself a fence around your pile. You can put it up against a hillside. Everything will work. The slide that we have up right now gives the temperature record for a pile that we made a couple of years ago at the county fair. And you can look on the left side of your screen. There's temperature on that axis, and days are recorded across the top, and we mark the temperature. When we started at the fair, we simply mixed together our greens and browns, water, air, as we've said before, and within a couple days, 2 or 3 days, without our doing anything else, the bacteria in the middle of the compost pile began to heat up and raise the temperature. The first part of the temperature is 68 to 113, which is just about the temperature we were all living with last week during the heat wave. So these are mesophilic bacteria. They were all happy during that heat wave, even if we weren't. They bring the temperature up to 113, and then they begin to form spores, which is a inert suspended animation version of themselves, because when it gets hot enough, they kick the thermophilic bacteria into action. And you see that in the next portion of our chart here. It's sort of in the middle of the screen. And as the temperature goes along for several days or possibly several weeks, the temperature goes up to 160 degrees. And in this range, where it's between 135 and 160, weed seeds and pathogens can be killed. And at the end of this time, those bacteria start to slow down their activity, the pile cools off a bit, and we just let it age until we're ready to use it. You can see on the bottom right, there's a warning: do not turn or disturb decomposers in a cold pile. They sort of organize their favorite bed mates in that pile, and they sit there and do their thing together. And if your pile is cold, you're not going to make any impact on it by turning it. So you just leave it alone. As it cools down even more, you can see on the bottom right that the worms come into action. They're kind of like magic. They're suddenly all there in your compost pile, and you wonder where they came from. It's a big mystery. They were in the soil, and apparently there's a clarion call from the compost, and they all come and begin to reproduce and finish your compost off really nicely. You can download this form in case, remember I was talking about thermometers? In case you're indulging in a thermometer, you can download this form from our website and make your own chart, just like you did back in 7th grade science. Talking further about the bacteria, we've got the same sort of chart here. On the left is the temperature, and across the top, we just have descriptions of the different bacterial activity at these temperatures. On your lower left are listed the name mesophilic bacteria. They are working, as we said before, up to 113 degrees. They break down the soluble starches and sugars, and they're the ones that kick everything off for your batch pile. They're the ones that start the heat that gets everyone else going. So in the center, well insulated, these guys go to work. You don't have to do anything. You just stack everything up the way Kristen told you, and they do it for you. So when the temperature gets up to 120 or so, the thermophilic bacteria kick in. These guys concentrate on fats and protein and cellulose and hemicellulose. They also kill most seeds and pathogens. On the top of that pinkish area, they list some seeds and weeds that aren't killed by these bacteria generating this much heat. So when you are deciding how to make your batch pile, go to our site, look at this slide, and read the kinds of seeds and bulbs that aren't killed by this, and be sure you keep them out. So these thermophilic bacteria keep on going until they have pretty much used up their substrates, and then they stop, the temperature drops a bit, and those organisms on the lower right side of your screen, the fungi and the filamentous bacteria, start to work on what's left. Usually things like cellulose, they take a longer time. If you dig around in the corners of a raised bed, I've had this experience, you suddenly see these white threads in there and you will think, what on earth is going on here? Well, it's compost happening in the corner of your raised bed, and those are the threads of the fungi that you're seeing there. So that's a good thing. As the temperature drops, we get the guys who have legs. First we have snails and slugs and worms coming in there, but then the guys with legs, the springtails and ants and millipedes, these are called mesofauna, and they chew up the big pieces that have been left by the bacteria breaking down the smaller components of your browns and greens. So you can leave this pile. If you're a compulsive type person and you want to have some impact on what's going on, you could turn the edges of your pile into the center, and that will spike the heat again, but you don't need to. You can just let it sit there, and the longer it sits, the more useful it becomes for your garden. It's a more available, richer source of nutrition for your garden. So just let it sit there. You can make one pile in the fall, use it in your spring garden, start a second pile and use it in the fall if you want to. And this will give you the very best compost.
Okay, just to review the two reasons for hot composting. You get that heat that is 135 to 155. You get 3 days of sustained heat that kills pathogens and weed seeds. So one round of heat is going to take care of that. Also, that bacterial phase that generates the heat speeds things up. So you get a little bit of acceleration there. The turning is optional, and people always ask us, do I have to turn it? They're ready to run away because they think they have to break their backs turning compost constantly, and you do not have to. All of the long curing period that Peggy described, those guys add value to your compost, and it makes your compost, your homemade compost, different from commercial compost where they're just turning it, getting heat, turning it, getting heat. And you can do that too if you want to, but given that we really only need a big pile of compost every 6 months for the spring garden and the fall garden, it makes a lot of sense for the lazy gardener to do 2 batch piles a year and not indulge in the turning. And all of this leads up to the soil life, which is why our home compost is so valuable.